Good morning, Coldwell Banker, George Realty. We have a special guest today, Ami Adini from Environmental Services, who will discuss the recent developments in environmental due diligence. So, Ami, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Michelle. So we will talk about recent developments, and in the way that I will present it, basically, I will tell you what we do today, and the recent developments will be kind of embedded in my descriptions, because I don't expect you to know what we had before and what the differences between what we had before and what we have now. Our field is continuously and constantly is developing, and I will do my best to tell you how we do it today, and that also, by the way, includes our recent developments in the field of environmental due diligence in the commercial and industrial transactions. So on the left, you see me with my hard hat. Sometimes I wear my hard hat, not at this moment. And in the middle, you see my daughter, Sigal Adini. She is managing my business. She's doing my accounting. She's doing my promotion. And on the right, you see your old-time friend, John Wax. He is a gentleman and a good friend that introduced me to CB George probably 5 years ago. So I wanted to give him a credit for that. I like him a lot, and I know that you use his services. We have been doing this phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments and abatement and cleanup of contaminations since 1988. So it's kind of quite a few years. And as far as my personal background, I graduated just a short while ago in 1964 in mechanical and nuclear engineering and chemical engineering, and worked for about eight years in the nuclear industry, and moved to the chemical processing plants, and eventually arrived to the United States in 1977, became a general engineering contractor in 1989, and with special certification for removal of hazardous substances. And this is where I specialize as a contractor. So I am also, my company, I should say, we are also contractors, not only consultants, and we remove hazardous substances. Here is a recent case. This is a place that used to be a Terminix, a pesticide facility. They used to store and mix and distribute pesticides, and our client wanted to redevelop it from a kind of industrial commercial place to residential. And we had to go through very strict requirements of the California EPA, Department of Toxic Substances Control. And this is in an area which has become quite lucrative in recent years in Los Angeles, the neighborhood of Silver Lake. And by the time we ended here, we removed about, I think, over 1,000, maybe 2,000, not 1,000 cubic yards of soil and concrete that was contaminated with pesticides. And sorry, yeah. So this is as far as my short dissertation of my background. The phase 1 environmental site assessment, what does it do? There are quite misconceptions out there as what phase 1 does and what it doesn't do. And some of the questions that I get sometimes is, okay, you're going to do a phase 1, and if you find contamination, how much will it cost me to clean it up? That's not what we do in the phase 1. Okay, so I will tell you what we do and also what we don't do in the phase 1 process. And what I'm going to tell you will align with our most recent developments in this field. The work that we do is controlled or managed or by a standard that issued by the ASTM, American Society of Testing and Material International, and they specialize in creating standards in all fields of industry and occupation for the industry. And they have a standard they call designation E1527. E stands for environmental, 1527 is a number, and dash 21. 21 means this is the year where it was latest, not developed, but latest improved or latest expanded or revised. Every 8 years, this standard is being updated and revised. The first year when it was issued was in 1992. So that, almost 32 years ago. And since then, every 8 years, it's being revised and updated. So the standard that we work today was recently, I say 21 is recently because it was promulgated in 21, and by the time we started to use it, it became 22 and 23. So it's almost yesterday. And this is a standard practice. We practice in accordance with the rules of this standard practice for environmental site assessments. That's the name, Phase 1 Environmental Site Assessment Process. So our job is to assess. And when we assess something, we are basically, the basic concept of assessment is, as on the left, we said to assess, we see the rows here, we evaluate the nature or quality of. So if we have a rose and we wanted to evaluate the nature or quality of, we probably would have to establish a certain yardsticks. How are we going to evaluate the nature or quality of the rose? Somebody may say, okay, it will go by size. Somebody will say it will go by color. Another one will say it will go by smell. Somebody else will say it will go by longevity. So we have a rose and we want to evaluate it. And so we better have a certain standard, because if we don't evaluate it by the standard or evaluation by the criteria, then each one of us may have their own criteria and we will get into some possibly major disagreement about what a rose is, right? Similarly goes for this a cup of the cappuccino here on the upper right. How do we assess a cup of cappuccino? By the color, by the aroma, by the size, by the temperature, by the cup. What is a good cappuccino? So once again, if we don't have agreement on how we assess the cappuccino, we will never agree as to what cappuccino is. So the same goes for the environmental site assessment. When we when we started this field back in the late 1980s, we had no standards. My very first Phase 1, I did it in 1988, 72 oil fields for Texaco USA. They had a big penalty against them at the time of about $11 billion. They had to liquidate in a hurry, and they wanted to liquidate 72 oil fields in California. So we got the contract, and we went to evaluate and do a Phase 1, 1988, and nobody knew what a Phase 1 is. All of what we know is we need to do a Phase 1, and basically we created it as we went along. We created our process, but everybody, consultants, did it in different ways. I remember already back in the 1980s when we started to do the Phase 1s, we were charging, some consultants were charging almost $5,000 to do a Phase 1. Today, the price runs anywhere from, I would say, the spectrum of $1,800 to $2,800, sometimes $3,500. Depends on the complexity. Because now we are much more standardized, but in 1988 we had no standard. So we needed a standard, and it was created in 1992, and then it's being updated. So the purpose, every work, when we do it, we have a certain purpose in mind. What is the purpose of the Phase 1? So the purpose is to define, the purpose of the standard is to define good commercial and customary practice. How do we do it? In the United States of America, for conducting an environmental site assessment of a parcel of commercial real estate with respect to the range of contaminants. Now, this is very important. When we evaluate a property in our Phase 1, when we assess it, we measure it with respect to a certain range of contaminants. So, for example, we don't assess in phase 1, we don't assess it for asbestos. We don't assess it for lead-based paint. We don't assess it for mold. We have a specific criteria by which we assess, by which we measure the liability, if you wish, or the concerns that we have with regard to the property. And the yardsticks or the criteria by which we assess it is the range of contaminants within the scope of the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. So this is a very long name. In short, we call it CERCLA, but this is a very long name to a law that was enacted in 1976. It has a very interesting history, but it created the entire industry of basically remediation, cleanup and remediation. And the law defined what contaminants we were concerned about. So there could be, I don't know, thousands of contaminants out there in the environment, but the law definitely gives us a certain list of those contaminants. So we assess it with respect to a range of contaminants. So when I walk into a property, here we have a Casco property, and I need to do a phase 1 on it, I do not assess it in terms of the quality of the pavement. I don't assess it in terms of how strong or how solid the structure is. I don't assess it in terms of how many cars are parking there and how many customers they have per day. I assess it only with respect to a range of contaminants. Here is a field up in the high desert. I was being asked to assess a certain plot here. This is the one in the circle, in the center. All right. So when I assess it, it's sand, it's dirt. Okay, what do I assess it? I assess it with respect to a range of contaminants. What contaminants might be in an open field like this? Well, surprise, we find in a couple of projects that we did in the high desert that some unscrupulous people used it for illegal dumping. So we had illegal dumps, and we had to analyze, and they dumped some contaminants, some contaminated dirt, and we had some arsenic, and we had some lead that we needed to handle for our client. But we don't assess it with respect, we go to the field, we don't assess it with respect to what kind of sand it is. We don't assess it with respect to the structural, to the soil structure. Sometimes we get calls, and prospective clients want to know if we can assess it for stability of the soil on a hillside. No, we don't. We only assess it with respect to a range of contaminants. Here is a shopping strip. We walk over here. We do not assess it with respect to how many tenants are here. Yes, we count the tenants, but only from the viewpoint of can anybody of them generate contamination. But we don't assess it with respect to how much income they make. Is it profitable? So just only with respect to the range of contaminants. Gasoline stations, again, we don't assess it with respect to the size of the tanks. We may indicate what is the size, but what the size of the tanks are, but this is not a criteria by which we decide if there are concerns on this property. So we assess it with respect to a range of contaminants, and CERCLA, or we call it also the Superfund law, give us a list of contaminants. There are about over 500 of these, and when we look into a property, we look into it from the viewpoint of can any of these contaminants be present on the property? Here are some, I would say, popular or sexy, I should say, chemicals or contaminants, chlorine, that's a pesticide, arsenic, it's a poison, benzene, okay, it's toxic, chromium-6, hexavalent chromium, dieldrin. These are some examples of the more, I would say, prevalent ones that we find in our field, in our surveys. Mercury, we are interested in mercury. Here down here below, PCBs. Here we have PCBs upper right corner. These are the kind of contaminants, just examples that we are interested in when we go into a property. again, let's say we have this oil depot, and I have assessed quite a few of those in my time. And when we walk into it, we probably are not going to search we will not probably will be concerned about pesticides. We will be concerned, we probably will not be concerned about chlorinated solvents, which is a kind of contaminant. We will be assess it with respect to the range of contaminants that we expect in an oil depot, which will be petroleum compounds. Here is cleaners. When we walk into a cleaners, which kind of became, how they say, the problem of the day. We have a lot of cleaners out there, and accordance with statistics of the US EPA, about 75% of the historic cleaners, they leaked, they discharged chlorinated solvents into the ground. And once it gets into the ground, it volatilizes and it travels as a vapor in the soil. So it is a concern. And when we see a dry cleaner, we probably are not going to assess it in terms of petroleum or PCBs or lead. We will right away we will focus our attention on a range of contaminants that is typical to dry cleaners, which are chlorinated solvents. Here is a salvage yard. Well, that's what kind of contaminants we expect in a salvage yard. So there is a certain range of contaminants that we expect in a salvage yard. We expect contaminants of like PCBs, maybe a little bit of oil, but oil, we are not that much concerned about oil because it doesn't go too far. Maybe some chlorinated solvents, but the moment we look on a landfill, on a salvage yard like this, we know right away what kind of contaminants we can expect there and to test for. And again, we will zero in and only look into this type of contaminants or this kind of contaminants that are under the Superfund law that are listed in this CERCLA 500 plus chemicals. Here is a machine shop. All right, so we walk into that and we say what kind of contaminants could be present in a machine shop. And when we look into it, we say, well, okay, there could be petroleum compounds, it could be chlorinated solvents, something like that. So the way when we do the phase one, we always look or assess the situation in terms of not only what kind of contamination could be there, but what could be contaminated. And here is an example of what we call the media, the typical media that get contaminated by industrial and commercial practices. On the left, you see an industrial plant, and they have an underground tank, and this tank leaked substance that is heavier than water. The turquoise is groundwater, and you see here the chemicals that they leaked in a purple is heavier than water. It goes down through the aquifer, goes down to the bottom of the aquifer. This kind of contamination, it is a groundwater, contaminated groundwater. It moves, you see the arrow, it moves with the direction of groundwater flow. Some of it may dissolve in the water and move as soluble products in the water. So this is one medium that can get contaminated. And I can tell you right away, cases like this where groundwater is contaminated with chlorinated solvent are very, very expensive to resolve. And it could run into the millions in no time. And so when we assess a property in the phase one, we look into the potential of contamination. So we walk into this industrial plant, and we see they have underground tanks, and we know that those tanks contain certain chemicals of concerns. Right away, we say, where is groundwater? Why? Groundwater here is at 20 feet below grade. Right away, we get concerned with the phase one. We don't know if it is contaminated. We have no idea. But we say, we have this industrial plant. We have underground tanks. They store chlorinated solvents. They store petroleum. They are close to groundwater. we are concerned about possible contamination in the groundwater because it will be very expensive to clean it up. So this is one medium that we are concerned about. Here in the middle, you see above ground tanks, and you see the kind of reddish contamination. It leaks into the soil, and it gets down to groundwater, and it floats on the groundwater, all right, because it's lighter than water. For example, petroleum compounds are lighter than water. So they will float on the water, and some of it will dissolve into the water, and some of it will evaporate. You see here the purple cloud, if you wish, in the soil, and it migrates as a purple cloud and goes under the residential building, and it may enter into the building. So in this case, we have the soil medium or soil matrix that is contaminated with, let's say, gasoline, and we have the groundwater under it that could be contaminated by the gasoline dissolving into it. We have the vapor that moves into the soil, and we might have an indoor air. So we have here like four different media that could be contaminated: the soil, groundwater, soil vapor, and indoor air. So again, when we do the phase one, when we walk into a property, let's say we walk into this industrial plant or a commercial facility, we look and say, okay, what is there? How far is it from groundwater? What kind of soil does it have? Could they be leaking a contaminant that might evaporate into the soil? And once it evaporates, might it migrate into this building? Or let's say we do a phase one on the building. This is a, let's say, apartment building. And so when we do the phase one on the building, right away we look beyond the fence and we see the industrial plant, and we say, what's the distance between our building and the industrial plant? And in our phase one, we say whether or not we should be concerned about this industrial plant maybe creating contamination that migrates into the building. So here is another rendition of the situation. We have a landfill here on the left. It discharged contamination. It went down through the soil, reached groundwater. Some of it evaporated. Groundwater moved, contamination moved in groundwater. It evaporates, get into the building. So here is a scenario that we are concerned about when we do the phase one. Sorry. Okay. Here is another case. It's a real case that we investigated at one time. Our client owns this apartment building. Another consultant did the phase one, and they indicated a concern about the dry cleaners here on the upper right corner, kind here, where you see my cursor is. And let me see. Oops, I'm sorry. Oh, I did something wrong here. Okay, here we are back. All right. So they were concerned about this dry cleaner. So we were retained to do the phase two, and guess what? We did it. We tested the soil vapor under the building. We found it was contaminated with perchloroethylene, which is a solvent that dry cleaners use. And but there is a but. It was contaminated, but it was in such levels that were not of a concern, very low levels, and we gave them a clean bill of health. But this is just to demonstrate to you how far away the contamination traveled from these dry cleaners here on the upper right corner to this building and beyond, okay? It went far beyond the building. This was about, in this case, it traveled about 250 feet, almost 300 feet away from the source. So it can travel. And so when the consultant that did the phase one on that apartment building expressed concern for contamination that might come into the building from the neighbors. Here's another case that we did a few years ago. Gosh, it's almost 10 years now. Time flies. But our client owned this shopping strip here. See on where my cursor is. And they wanted to refinance, and the bank will not refinance because they were concerned about contamination. There were other reports done by others that said that groundwater under this property is contaminated. And there used to be a historic cleaner on this property. And so the bank would not refinance. It was a $5 million deal. And we were retained, and we did a very complex investigation because we had to do it under the auspices of California EPA. And we demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that there is a dry cleaner here. The contamination was generated here, traveled under the street into the groundwater, migrated with the groundwater under the property. Yes, they had a historic cleaner here on the property, but again, we demonstrated beyond doubt that the historic cleaner here did not cause the contamination that migrated there, and eventually the case was resolved. But again, here was a concern of contamination that reached them from the neighbor. By the way, by the time we finished all the investigation and proved to the EPA that our client was clean, it was $250,000 just to investigate. Because once it gets to the government and we have to go through the whole routine, everything becomes triple or quadruply more expensive. So back to the phase one. So we discussed that the purpose was to assess with respect to certain contaminants. So we need a yardstick. How do we, when we assess in respect to contaminants, what is good and what is bad? I mean, we say, well, okay, there might be contaminations there, but how much of a concern is a concern, all right? So we need a certain yardstick because there might be a big concern and there might be a small concern. What is a real concern? So the ASTM gave us, oh, by the way, are there any questions so far? I know I'm running at a high speed, but if there are any questions, all right. So I don't see questions. And so let me continue. All right. So the yardstick that the ASTM is giving us by which to decide if our phase one report say it is a go, or if our phase one report said no, it is not a go. Is it good or no? We have a concern. We have a certain yardstick that is called recognized environmental conditions, and it is a name. Let us not assign to it too much significance. It is a name invented by the ASTM, and is called and recognized environmental conditions. And what is a recognized environmental condition? So there is the definition is it has many components, several components to it. And we will go one component at a time and try and to see what is our concern, what we determine when we issue the report of the phase one, what is a recognized environmental condition? Because once we as consultants, we declare a recognized environmental condition, if the deal is going through any conventional bank or institutional bank or through an SBA loan, once we decide, it's critical because then the SBA or the bank will not proceed with the transaction unless we resolve the condition by a phase two. And we will talk in a minute what is a phase two environmental site assessment. So it lays on us a heavy responsibility to our client, to decide if there is a recognized environmental condition there. It is material to the transactions, and some transactions they fail because we decided that there is a recognized environmental condition. So what is a recognized environmental condition? So one definition is the presence of hazardous substances or petroleum products in, on, or at the subject property due to a release to the environment. This is a very solid, very positive assessment. We call it REC short for Recognized Environmental Condition. So I call it number one, all right? There is a release. There was a release on the property. there was a dumping on the property, and there is a presence. It is there. It is positive. Okay, so this is a recognized environmental condition. Here, an example. You see the drums on the upper left side. You see what happened here in the field. You see this dark fluid that came from the drums. This is not drinking water, right? These are chemical drums. Okay, we see it. We say, aha. We have a release and we have presence. This is a recognized environmental condition. See here on the bottom right, you see this water. This is water in the excavation. Could be even groundwater if it is very shallow. You see the contamination in it. Okay, there is a release and there is a presence. So if we see that, we say, aha, recognize environmental conditions. There is a release and there is a presence. This is one of the simple cases to declare a recognized environmental condition. Here is a case, a recent case, no, probably a couple of years ago. We walk into this car mechanic shop and they are very lousy. They don't maintain good housekeeping. Look here, this is where we're supposed to keep their waste oil. And here is an open pail, okay, an open pail or whatever, a bucket with the oil in it, okay? And here is another one here which kind of tilted, all right? Look on the floor here. We see this, no, this mechanic is not good in housekeeping. And we say, we declare a recognized environmental condition, release and presence, all right? Again, same mechanic. Look what is happening here under the hoist. Okay, there is a discharge here of oil. It's not good. All of this is stained. Okay, there is a puddle on the floor, right? So there is a release and presence. This is a recognized environmental condition. Here is another case that we did some. This is an old case, more than 10 years ago. DTC on the upper side. DTC is an historic gasoline station. They created a lot of contamination. It went to the shallow groundwater. The purple thing is this gasoline floating on the water. And then the green thing, it's dissolved into the groundwater. It migrated from them into the neighborhood. The rectangle, the red triangle here, a rectangle here is the DTC gasoline station. Very bad. This is the thermometer here is on the red, all right? And it traveled, okay? So, and it went to another client of ours here. Our ABM was a client of ours. It contaminated them. But this is a case where it is very, how could I say, extreme case of release and presence. So it's a recognized environmental condition. The second definition is a lot more complex than the first one, a lot more. Recognized environmental condition means the likely presence. Now, look here, okay, likely, now introduce a probability, likely presence of hazardous substances or petroleum products in, on, or at a subject property due to a release or likely release to the environment. There are double likely here. There could be likely presence and likely presence due to a likely release. Okay, so I divided it into two sub-conditions, if you wish. Condition REC 2A, we have a release and plus likely presence. Or we have a likely release and likely presence. And let me demonstrate it to you right away. So I'll show you pictures in a moment, but so again, the differences. REC number one, this is in your face. I put this sumo fighter here, all right? He's in your face, all right? That's a release and presence. There is a certainty. There is no questions. But the REC number two, we have too many likelies here. So we're kind of pondering here. And let me give you some examples. Here is a case in Pomona. It's a celebrated case, if you wish, in an industrial plant that generated perchloroethylene, a solvent for the industry, and they had a major spill there, and it traveled as a soil vapor. what we call like kind of elevation lines, if you wish, like a topographical map, are the lines of concentrations. It spreads out like the ripple effect in a pool. All right, you have the stone which is thrown in the middle, and then you have the ripple effect, the vapor traveling further away from the point of discharge. And our prospective client is here at the red cloud, and this is commercial zone here, and they are pretty far. I can look here at this scale. They are about probably 1,000 feet away from the point of discharge. And the evidence is, and as a consultant investigated here, the evidence is that the vapor, toxic vapor, traveled from the plant to this property. So we have here a case that falls under definition if we do a phase 1 here, and we already have the data from other consultants and other investigations, we have the data as what happened in this plant, we have the data about this ripple effect that traveled far and beyond, and now we go to do a phase 1, we say, look, dear client, we have a situation here of release at this plant, and we have a situation of likely presence at your place. Okay, so this falls under REC 2A, release and presence. And right away, when we issue the report, we say, well, that's the situation is you might be contaminated. All right, because we have reports that show that contamination traveled into your area, so there is a release and likely presence. Here is another situation I showed you before, another rendition of it. This is at the gasoline station that I showed you before. We investigated here. All these clouds here, purple clouds, are gasoline that is floating on the water, free gasoline floating on the water. And if we were, in theory, if we were to conduct a phase 1 here in the neighborhood under the purple cloud, we will indicate a condition, because we'll say there is a release here just beyond the fence, the other side of the fence. We are very concerned that it traveled, we already know it traveled to the left here, to the west. We are also concerned that it might travel down here. We are too close, so there is a condition of a release and likely presence, and we indicate it as a concern. Playa Vista, this is, you're familiar with Playa Vista, that's not far away from Los Angeles Airport and from Marina del Rey in Los Angeles. Used to be the site of Howard Hughes aircraft, and it is, quote unquote, a celebrated place for being contaminated, but it did not, the place's groundwater is contaminated, and the contamination here is, where is, okay, the purple cloud is Howard Hughes site, right? This is, we know it is contaminated, and the red cloud is the neighbors beyond it, and we already know by other investigations that the contamination traveled from Howard Hughes site into the red site. So once we go there into any one of those red triangle properties, if we need to do a phase 1 in this area, we are likely to indicate a condition, recognize the environmental condition, because we know there is a release at Howard Hughes, and we know there is a likely presence in this property not far away from Playa Vista. And now here is a condition, the second sub-condition of likely presence and likely release. So this is a property that we did a year ago in Paris. In Paris, P-A-R-E-S, Paris, and no, P-E, I think P-E-R-R-E-S, Paris, anyway. So it's in Riverside County, and our job was to do a phase 1 on the property here on the right, all right, on the right side of the fence. So I'm standing here on the right side of the fence, and I'm looking on the other side of the fence, and you see what I see here, all right? All these drums, and I see the stained soil, and these drums don't look in a very good condition. And I'm sending my hand over the fence. You don't see me because, and I take a picture over because I'm here on the right side of the fence. So I'm taking picture on the left side of the fence of the neighbor, and I'm saying condition because it seems like those drums leaked. They discharged. That is a discoloration around, and I don't know what was in the drums, but they may have contained chemicals, solvents that could have entered into the ground and evaporated and migrated into my client property. So we have, I don't know if they leak, but they are likely, by what I see, they are likely to have leaked. So there is a likely release here, and there is a likely presence at my neighbor. So right away I say, condition, recognize environmental condition. Here is another case. My client owned, I should say, the poor guy has passed away, so, but he owned this car wash here on the right, and I did the phase one for him, and there was a cleaner here on the shopping strip here. And they were at such a distance that, in my experience, if they leaked, it could travel to my client. He was not too far. I think the distance was about 250 feet away. And I, in my own experience, in my own eyes, quote unquote, I found contaminants from dry cleaners to migrate 300 feet. So I go to my client and I say, dear client, there is a condition here of likely release and likely presence. I cannot tell you that you are contaminated. And they say, well, what is my chance to be contaminated? I say, well, I don't know, you're about 300 feet away. I know of many cases where contamination did not travel that far, but I know some cases where it did travel that far. So just for illustration, I would say to you, you may have a 20% chance of being contaminated. But if you are contaminated, the 20% becomes 100%, all right? So you need to decide what is your risk tolerance. I cannot tell you, my client, what is your risk tolerance? How much do you want to know? How much it's important for you to know if you are contaminated? How important will it be to a prospective buyer or prospective lender to worry about it? So, but I'm telling you that there is a likely, based on my professional experience and my professional opinion, you have a condition here of likely release and likely presence, and I'm going to indicate a recognized environmental condition. And this put on my shoulder a heavy responsibility, because once I indicate it in my report, and if it goes to an SBA lender or Wells Fargo or Bank of America or whatever other bank, US bank, they will not land on the property before we do a phase two, all right, which is a second phase, second aspect of our work. Okay, let us skip this one. And Einstein says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So I'm trying to explain it simply so that you will understand it. And if you don't understand it, it's my fault. That means that I did not explain it simply enough. Condition number 3 is presence of hazardous substances or petroleum products in, on, or at a subject property under conditions that pose a material threat of a future release. So there is a presence of hazardous substances. They have not yet contaminated the property, but there is a material threat of a future release. Okay, let me show you. Pictures speak better than words. Oh, just there. So in illustration, we had the recognized environment. We had the condition number 1, which was our sumo fighter. It was a very positive condition. There was a release and there was a presence. All right. Number 2 was kind of iffy one, and this is one of the more difficult conditions for me as a professional environmental assessor. For me, it's more difficult to decide if it is a condition or no, because it lays quite a responsibility on me. How likely is likely, all right? So, but this is a condition where we have all these likelies there. That's number 2. Number 3, again, it's kind of positive, semi-positive. There is a presence and there is a material threat of a future release. There is still a certain uncertainty here. Example that speaks for itself. we go into this place, I don't see contamination on the floor, but look on the situation, all right? So there is a presence and material threat of a future release. We say, hey, guy, you don't have a good housekeeping. We indicate it as a condition. Look on here, okay, this tank is very rusted. This is a chemical storage plant. We are concerned about it. We say, okay, this tank can start leaking anytime. So there is a threat of future release. Look here. That's not a very good housekeeping. And when we look at it, they say, there is a threat here of a future release. Those buckets here or containers, they can topple any moment and release. And look here, this drum was full of cyanide solution. And so we are concerned, future release, etc. So Leah Yakoka says, I'm giving it to you as a real estate agent. We are continually faced by great opportunities, brilliantly disguised as insoluble problems. All right. So don't scare and don't get exasperated and don't get desperate if our phase one sometimes indicate the conditions, because there could be the deal of your life could be hiding beyond those conditions that we indicate. So there is no reason to despair, even if we indicate recognized environmental condition. Even if there is contamination, there is no reason to despair yet. So the yardstick, what did I want to say here? Oh, yeah. One of the conditions that we have is we call it the de minimis condition. The de minimis condition is basically a condition where we have contamination, make it simple word, we see contamination, but we decide that it's immaterial. It's not a threat to human health or the environment, and it will not cause an enforcement action if the regulatory agencies get involved in it. So if we decide that it is not a threat to human health and we decide that the regulators will not be concerned about it, it is a de minimis condition. Case in point, here is on the right-hand side, here is our regulator, okay? It's the lady with the sword. She's our regulator and said, no, she will not get here. She will not get involved here, all right? This is a car mechanic here. We see the stains on the floor, but we know the nature of what we used to be here. We know the nature of the floor. We say, yes, there are some stains on the floor, but this is, in our observation, this is not bad. There is a release here, but it's minimal, it's de minimis. Regulators will not be concerned about it, forget about it. This is the de minimis condition. On the left side, you see here, down on the left side below, you see here a hydraulic lift. And yes, many hydraulic lifts have leaked. And some regulatory agencies, if you go to, I think, Riverside County, they will make a big deal out of it. So if I'm in Riverside County and I see such a condition, I will indicate a problem. But if I am in Los Angeles City or in LA County or in Orange County, they are not concerned about hydraulic lifts at all. So when I see that, I say, okay, regulators here will not be concerned about it. I'm not concerned about it. It's a de minimis condition. It's a pass. So as they said one time, pornography is a matter of geography. So I guess the same goes sometimes for contamination. It's a matter of what jurisdiction, what regulatory agency is in charge. Unfortunately, sometimes that's the case. Let's skip this one. Let's skip that one. And skip this one. And all right, just in closing, we'll close with Pablo Picasso. He says, I'm always doing that which I cannot do in order that I may learn how to do it. And I found in my experience that that's very wise saying. On my personal experience, and I assume that you had it in your own personal experience, we have situations where at first we don't know how to handle them, but we move into them anyway, and we learn as we go, and then we learn how to do it better for the next time. So I'll open the floor here for questions. Are there any questions? I'm looking into the chat, and I don't see any questions.
I have a question.
All right.
So in picking a company to perform the phase one initially, are there certain qualifications that one should be aware of the inspectors?
Yes, there are certain qualifications. Number one, by the ASTM standard and by rules of the EPA, it has to be a qualified environmental professional. And EPA has in its own regulations a detailed description about, I think, maybe 2 pages long, and who or what qualifies as an environmental professional. There are certain requirements as far as education, practice, experience, and whoever, there is no governmental certification, if you wish, formal, like if you go, there is no licensing requirement,
Oh,
no
okay.
government like an engineer, a licensed engineer, or there is, the individual has to be qualified. And I would say if somebody who is not qualified doing it, then they run the risk of, if they get sued, if anything goes into trouble, and then they run a big risk of tort dispute and being sued or whatever. So, and this could be a big, kind of serious risk for them. So I would say, when you look for qualified environmental professionals, make sure that they are qualified and ask them, if you wish, are you qualified by the standards or by the criteria of the EPA? And if they say yes, maybe you want to ask also for their insurance, for professional insurance to be added to that. And then you should be pretty safe. And you may also just, common sense, you may want to ask for them to give you a short resume of their experience. And maybe sometimes even recommendations from past clients. It depends on your level of how good you feel about them. And,
Do you recommend the environmental phase one on like even, let's say, office buildings, and because they are sitting with other buildings? So what's your recommendation on when an environmental phase one should be ordered?
Okay. Let me answer and then I'll qualify my answer. My recommendation or my opinion does not always count in terms of what prospective lenders, conventional lenders, or SBA really
Okay.
require. I can look into an office building and look into where it is located and run a 5-minute check, and I'll tell you don't have anything to worry about. All right. And but when it comes to the Bank of America or whatever, or Wells Fargo or SBA loan, they will. I'm sorry, let me quiet it. I'm sorry, let me quiet my phone. They will demand a phase one for an office
Okay.
building.
Do we have any other questions out there? If you do, unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
Good presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was
You're very
great.
welcome.
Yeah.
And by the way, long time ago, I learned that the only stupid questions are the questions that I don't ask. So don't hesitate, don't hesitate to ask. When I was in school, in the first year in school, there was a guy there that always I was asking questions, and we were kind of booing him, because he was interrupting, interrupting the presenter or the professor, and we said, "Stop booing him, stop doing it," Guess what? Guess who was #1 student at the end of the year, So.
Yeah.
It's okay, it's okay to ask any question.
So you see your phone number is on the screen and your email. So CBGR, if you have any questions or properties that you need to discuss, feel free to contact Ami directly.
Yeah.
And if there's no questions, we'll adjourn the meeting. And thank you so much. That was a fabulous presentation. We really
you.
appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank
Thank
you.
you.